And Robert, thanks for that. We will go ahead and move to low intensity conflict. There's not been a whole lot of far left activity here and there. And when there's something significant, I jump on and talk about it. Otherwise, it's just going to be some other group says something incendiary online, and that really is about the brunt of it. However, you've probably heard of this group before, Unity of Fields. They're a self-appointed propaganda outlet. It's really spearheading the pro-Palestine marches and direct action. And they reported yesterday that the movement is reaching a point where it either expands into a broader anti-imperialist movement or becomes contained. And it looks like to me they're reaching, the pro-Palestine movement in the United States is reaching a point of exhaustion. In a social media post, Unity of Fields reported it has two choices. Quote, expand into a universalist anti-imperialist movement that both mobilizes internally colonized people in the core. They're talking about the core of the empire, the United States, and adopts militant tactics capable of crippling state capacity for violence, or it becomes contained by counterinsurgency, basically being reduced to a single issue reformist movement. And they use this term compradors. I thought that was interesting. I had to Google exactly what it meant. A comprador is someone who is acting on behalf of a foreign country in the United States in this case. I thought that was very interesting. In a follow-up post, Unity of Fields referenced a call to action, citing the need for a socialist revolution. The cited quote in part says, quote, this is a necessary starting point for any socialist revolution anywhere, including in North America. Only when we begin with this proposition can we map a path to the seizure of state power, end quote. All right, here's my take on this. And this is an important pivot point here for the pro-Palestine movement inside the United States. Unity of Fields almost certainly realizes that this U.S.-based Palestine resistance and revolutionary movement is nearing a point of exhaustion. And I say that for many reasons, actually. The movement rebranded earlier this year from Palestine Action US with a strategy to unite all these disparate Palestine resistance groups under a single banner. It's important to note that Unity of Fields has since recanted and said that's not what they are. And they say they're just a propaganda outlet. They're not an activist or militant group. There is no leadership. And I think this is likely because a lot of these pro-Palestine groups did not go along with allowing Unity of Fields to be the top of their pyramid here. However, the strategy did garner some news media attention. I had to go back and sift through the reporting. There was a lot of talk about this leading to October 7th style attacks inside the United States. That is still possible. At the time when this happened back in August, I said, this is unlikely. I don't think this is what's going to happen, but it didn't stop a lot of the right-wing conservative news media from covering it like this. Like this is the beginning of the next iteration of 9/11s. And I said that was unlikely. However, just looking at what these people have really not accomplished, Unity of Fields looks like they really failed to gain the support of those various groups. The movement is no longer growing. I don't think the movement is growing. It's certainly not achieving more likes and shares and more followers and more direct action. It's even these days of action have been pretty lackluster. These tactics have had virtually no effect on disrupting the Israeli war in Gaza or Lebanon, virtually no effect on influencing or coercing U.S. politicians. These numerous campus occupations that we saw earlier this year were rolled back, and they did not reemerge this fall. The movement overall really does appear to be struggling to maintain relevance. And this is something that I've also pointed out among these far left groups and the Vanguard Antifa groups, the Vanguard revolutionary groups. They're just not active, and it doesn't look to me like they're preparing. They're not recruiting, organizing, certainly not mobilizing yet. That may change after Election Day, but that is the case right now. Also, associated protests and direct action campaigns like Mask Off Maersk and the Summer of Heat have failed to produce any results other than just organizing a handful of these events and probably imposing at the most, maybe the low millions of dollars in delays and property damage. Like they'll go in and protest and block workers from getting into these facilities. But Maersk is still shipping U.S. weapons to Israel. Chase Bank has not divested from these Israeli-linked financial investments, so they really have had a negligible effect there. The movement also failed to attract mainstream or activate mainstream political and social justice groups, also these vanguard groups from the so-called anti-fascist movement, in the same way that Black Lives Matter did in 2020. I think that was their hope, is they would kick off this pro-Palestine movement and everyone would just say, hey, this is it. It's another popular revolution. We're just going to glom on here in 2024. That did not happen, which I told you, I don't know, close to a year ago, I didn't think it would happen. Also, unity of fields, or these associated groups, I think can continue indefinitely this low-scale direct action, such as vandalism, due to a number of factors. But number one, the large body of Palestinian immigrants in the United States, militants who are sympathetic to Palestine, and also foreign backing. Some of these groups almost certainly have foreign backing. This post in particular appears to be out of frustration that this U.S.-based pro-Palestine movement 1 year on has gained very little traction. A poll from earlier this year showed that just 16% of Americans sympathized with the plight of Palestine, and a smaller fraction of that would support revolutionary activity towards that end. And so really it's nearly impossible to foment a revolution on such scant support. So in short, this post says that the Palestine solidarity movement needs to either end its singular focus on Palestine or become a reformist activist group that's just going to settle for another peace agreement, and they cited Oslo, the 1993 Oslo Accord peace agreement. On a separate note, Unity of Fields has also been rebroadcasting related posts from pro-Palestine groups instructing activists and militants to, quote, besiege the Zionist embassies globally and in the United States. So I would say an escalation in the coming days or weeks is possible. And the most dangerous course of action remains that a fraction of this U.S.-based pro-Palestine movement abandons the current set of failed tactics and escalates direct action beyond vandalism to domestic terrorism. I would say that's a most dangerous worst-case scenario. I do think it is possible. And the key here is understanding that when these groups talk about escalation, they kind of have their own escalation ladder. They go out and protest. Okay, protests are not working or not going to work. And then they go out and conduct vandalism. And Chase Bank having to pay I'm just guessing here, $1 million, or their insurance company has to pay $1 million for damage. Okay, that's not working. Now what's next? And so the next rung of escalation here would be most likely domestic terrorism if they do pursue that course of action. And the goal here would almost certainly be to inspire additional terrorist attacks against Israeli interests in the United States and around the world. I would also note that multiple U.S.-based groups, including members of the Columbia University Apartheid Divest group, have openly called for violence and armed resistance as well. Again, I don't think this is the most likely, but I will say it's possible. Certainly the most dangerous. And with that, let's go ahead and jump into the global sit rep here.